Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today's day 37 in our 90-day SAT prep series. Today I'll be taking you through problems 31 to 38 of SAT Practice Test 2 with the Math with Calculator section. Then I'll be switching over to the reading section and giving you my tips, tricks, advice, strategies for that section. Okay, so for today, make sure you have a notebook and workbook out for this math section, and make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'll really be trying to give you my tips, tricks, advice, and strategies for the SAT Math with Calculator section. In particular today, the free response section, right? So with the fill in the blank section is what we're going to be working on today. Really trying to teach you my strategies for that because it's a little bit different than the multiple choice section, but not a ton. So it's not super significant, just a couple subtleties. And then with the reading section, like I said, I'll be basically giving you my tips, tricks, advice, and strategies there as well. So let's go ahead and get started with question 31. So we have a coastal geologist estimates that a certain country's beaches are eroding at a rate of 1.5 feet per year. According to the geologist's estimate, how long will it take in years for the country's beaches to erode 21 feet? Okay, well that erosion of 21 feet has to equal that erosion of 1.5 feet per year. Okay, so how many years is that going to take, right, to get 21 feet eroded at a rate of 1.5 feet per year? Well, that's going to be times however many years we have, which we'll call a y, right? A big Y for years. Okay, so we're going to divide each side by that 1.5 feet per year. Divide each side by 1.5. 21 over 1.5. That's going to give us 14. And I'll double check that by plugging it into my calculator. 21 over 1.5 gives us 21 over 1.5 gives us 14, right? So 14 years is what our correct answer will be there. Okay, so answer there is going to be 14. So that one, obviously, since it's at the beginning of the math with calculator section for the free response part, it's going to be one of the easier questions, right? They're obviously going to get progressively harder as we go from 31 to 38. That one, obviously, very, very easy. All right, now we've got 32. If h hours and 30 minutes is equal to 450 minutes, what is the value of h? Okay, so we've got h hours plus 30 minutes equals 450 minutes. Subtract 30 minutes from each side. Okay, now we're left with 420 minutes. Okay, 420 minutes. That's equal to how many hours? Okay, well, we got to keep in mind that our number of hours gets multiplied by 60 to get us to our minutes. Okay, so our number of hours times 60 gives us our number of minutes. Now we got to divide each side by 60 then to solve for our number of hours. Okay, so 420 over 60 is going to give us 7 hours. So 7 will be equal to our number of hours. 7 will be our answer there. Okay, so where you could go wrong on this one is not realizing that you have to answer in hours, right? If you answered in minutes, you'd be wrong. So really, you just got to make sure that you're paying attention to what you're asked to answer with. In this case, the value of h, which is hours, which will be 7. So once again, at the beginning of that free response section, so still these problems will be fairly easy. Okay, so today we'll probably only end up spending 20 minutes, if that, on the math section because we're still just kind of going through these earlier problems. And then next week we'll get into a little bit more of different things than what we're doing right now. So we've got in the xy plane, the point 3 and 6 lies on the graph of the function f of x equals 3x squared minus bx plus 12. What is the value of b? All right, well, what we're going to do here, since we have this point, is we're going to have to plug it in. Okay, so we got 6 as our y, so 6 will be what f of x equals. All right, and that's going to equal 3 times 3 squared minus bx. Okay, we know that x is that 3, so it's going to be minus b times 3, which we can rewrite as minus 3b. Okay, so minus 3b. And then we got plus 12. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do that 3 times 3 squared. 3 squared is 9. 9 times 3 gives us 27. So we got 6 equals 27 plus 12. 27 plus 12, that's going to give us 39, right? I'll go ahead and do that right here. 39, and we still got that minus 3b. Okay, so we still have minus 3b. So we got 39 minus 3b equals 6. At this point, we subtract 39 from each side. Subtract 39 from each side. 6 minus 39. 6 minus 39 is going to give me negative 33. Negative 33 is going to equal that negative 3b. Negative 3b. Divide each side by negative 3 to solve for b. Negative 33 over negative 3 is going to give me 11. So 11 will equal b. Okay, so my answer there is going to be 11. So that one, once again, not too difficult of a problem. Okay, all we had to do is understand that we were given a point, we were given a function, and we're asked to solve for one of the parts in our function. That means we're going to substitute our points in. Okay, so anytime that you're given points on the SAT math section, and you're also given an equation and asked to solve for a part of that equation, you're immediately going to want to be thinking to put those points in. So that's something you can put in your notes. Okay, if you're given points on a graph and you're given an equation for those points, like what line they are lying on, okay, what you're going to want to do is plug in those points, then solve for whatever variable you're asked to solve for in that equation. So Immediately when I saw those points, I'm thinking, plug them in, solve for B. So answer there will be 11. So once again, not too difficult. 34. In one semester, Doug and Laura spent a combined 250 hours in the tutoring lab. If Doug spent 40 more hours than did Laura in the lab, so Doug spent 40 more than Laura, how many hours did Laura spend in the lab? Okay, well we know that Laura plus whatever Doug had, so plus Doug, that's going to equal that 250, right? Because they spent a total combined of 250 hours in the lab. But we have to solve for Laura, so we're going to plug in this L plus 40 for D, because we only need to solve for Laura. We don't have to solve for Doug. Okay, we see that that's going to mean that we're going to have L plus L, which is 2L, plus that 40, has to equal that 250. We subtract 40 from each side to isolate that 2L. So we subtract 240, subtract 40 from each side. Okay, 250 minus 40 is going to give me 210. So now I got 210 equals 2L. I'm going to divide each side by 2 and solve for Laura's hours. Okay, 210 over 2 gives me 105. So my answer there is going to be 105 is the number of hours that Laura tutored. Okay, so 105 is the answer there. Okay, I have one tip here. This is a tip that pretty much works for the no calculator and the calculator section, so just pay attention here. Anytime I'm asked for a combined situation like this, right, and I'm asked to solve for how many hours Laura did, right, or whatever variable I'm asked to solve for in one of these situations, make sure that we solve for that first. Don't solve for Doug first, because then we got to do an extra step. Okay, make sure we solve for whoever we're asked to solve for first. Okay, so let's say that you accidentally wrote down, L equals D minus 40, right? Let's say you wrote that down, okay? Don't plug in whatever L equals and then solve for Doug, okay? Just flip it around. If you accidentally wrote this down, then that's okay. Just make sure that you add 40 to each side then to get that L plus 40 equals D, because then you can sub in for D that L plus 40 and solve for Laura. Don't solve for Doug first, because then you're adding steps. Make sure you solve for whatever variable you're asked to solve for and not the other one first, okay? Because you don't get points for solving for Doug, you get points for solving for Laura. So that's a point that is for the no calculator, for the calculator, for the multiple choice, for the free response. That's just a general point for the SAT math section. Make sure you do that. All right, next we got Jane made an initial deposit to a savings account. Each week thereafter, she deposited a fixed amount to the account. The equation above models the amount A in dollars she deposited after T weekly deposits. According to the model, how many dollars was Jane's initial deposit? Where her initial deposit is going to be positive 15 because that comes at T0, right? Her initial deposit is T0 because there's no weeks during her initial deposit, which means that we're just going to have positive 15. Okay, so our answer there would just be 15. So once again, 35, that's going to be a fairly easy question there. All right, so not really any big tips there. Yeah, for the math section today, we're definitely not going to take anywhere near a half hour because we are moving. That's not really designed, like I'm not trying to go fast. It's just these problems are not too difficult, and I'm not going to waste your time or my time. So we've got, looks like we got a circle here. I see I've got right angles right here, right? Because these are tangent lines. LM is tangent to the circle. MN is tangent to the circle. So that means I'm going to have that right angle there with that radius. So we've got in the figure above, point O is the center of the circle. Line segments LM and MN are tangent to the circle at points L and N, respectively, and the segments intersect at point M as shown. If the circumference of the circle is 96, what's the length of minor arc LN? All right, so arc LN, we see that that's going to be, I'm going to put it in blue so you can see it better. It's going to be right here. Okay, that's arc LN. So we got to solve for that right there. Now we're told that the circumference is 96. Okay, so circumference is 96. So we got 96 as our circumference. Now we have to solve for the length of minor arc LN. Okay, what we're going to do here is we're going to understand that the angles in this sort of, I believe it's called a rhombus, the angles in this rhombus are going to add to 360 degrees. Okay, so that's going to equal that 60 degrees here plus these two 90-degree angles here. Okay, we know 90 degrees plus 90 degrees is 180 degrees, and then we're adding 60 degrees to that, and then we're adding whatever x, I'll call it x, that angle right there is, okay? So we have x plus 180 plus 60 equals 360. So I'll go ahead and minus 60 from each side, minus 60. That's going to give me 300. Now I'm going to subtract 180 from each side, subtract 180. That's going to give me 120 is equal to x. Okay, so I know my angle x is going to be 120. So I'm going to plug that in for x. So we got 120 degrees here. Okay, so now if I know my circumference is 96, then I know that my arc length LN, whatever that is, right? That'll be, we'll call that one x now. Or I guess we just used x, so we'll call that We'll just call it ln, right, for the arc length ln. If we're solving for that arc length, we're going to put it over our circumference and set it equal to whatever degrees that interior angle, in this case it's 120, whatever that interior angle is over that total in a circle, which is 360 degrees. We set that ratio up and then we just solve for ln. So one thing I want to point out again is I put my variable that I want to solve for up top in my ratio because it makes me do less steps, so it'll save me time. So that's something I recommend you do and put in your notes as well because it'll save you a lot of time. All right, so I do that, multiply each side by 96, solve for ln, plug it in my calculator. So I'm going to put in my calculator 96 times 120, 96 times 120, then I'm going to divide that by 360. When I do that, I get ln equals 32. Okay, so my answer there is going to be ln equals 32. So 32 is what I would put into my bubble sheet. So that one right there, that's basically a geometry problem, just making sure you understand your shapes, how your angles work. If you understand your shapes and how your angles work, then you're going to be good there. One thing that I should point out that I don't know if I have yet, so I'm going to erase this so you can see it more clearly. One thing that I want to point out is that when we have a tangent line like this, and I'll put it in blue so you can see it better, when we have a tangent line to this, that's going to make a 90-degree angle with this radius. Okay, so just understand that. A tangent line is a line that hits on one point on a circle, right? That's a tangent line right there that keeps going, right? It's going to make a 90-degree angle with that radius. Okay, so that's just one thing you should know that can help you solve problems like this. In this case, it was important to know that. Okay, the other thing you should know is all of these angles, right? This angle here, plus this 60 degree, plus this 90 degree, plus this 90 degree. Those are all going to add to 360. So that's another thing that you should know. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and move to 37. Like I said, today it's looking like we're going to end up finishing fairly early for the math part, but that's okay because I'm not going to sit here and waste your time, you know? So now we got questions 37 and 38. So we've got a botanist is cultivating a rare species of plant in a controlled environment and currently has 3,000 of these plants. The population of this species that the botanist expects to grow next year, which is symbolized by N next year, can be estimated from the number of plants this year, which is N this year, by the equation below. Okay, now this is a large equation. Now keep in mind, even though it may look intimidating, when we actually start doing this, it's not as intimidating as it may seem, right? It's not as difficult as it may seem. The constant K in this formula is the number of plants the environment is able to support. So according to the formula, what will be the number of plants 2 years from now? That's important to realize. It's 2 years from now if K equals 4,000. Okay, so we plug 4,000 in here for now, right, for 37, not for 40 or for 38 because it doesn't say to. Unless it does, then we will. All right, but we got 4,000 right there. So now we're solving for what the number of plants will be 2 years from now. We know that N this year is going to be 3,000 because that's what it tells us. She currently has 3,000 of these plants, and N this year is the number of plants she has this year, which is 3,000. So we can plug in 3,000 here, plug in 3,000 here, okay, plug in 3,000 here as well. Now we're asked to solve for the number of plants 2 years from now. So we're going to have to solve for next year's, that's 1 year from now, and then take whatever next year's is and plug it in for this year's, and then use that to solve for the year after that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. Okay, first thing I see I have 3,000 over 4,000. I know that that's the same as 3 over 4, right? I cancel those zeros. I get 3 over 4. I know 1 minus 3 over 4. 1 minus 3 over 4 is going to be a quarter, or 0.25. I take that 0.25, I'm going to multiply that by 3,000, and then I'm going to multiply that by 0.2, and then I'll add 3,000 to that. Okay, so I'll plug that in my calculator real quick. I got 3,000 plus 0.2 times 3,000 times 0.25. I do that, and that's going to get me 3,150. Okay, so that's my first year. So I'm going to mark that with a 1, call that first year. Okay, so my first year, after my first year, I got 3,150. Okay, now I'm going to take that, and I'm going to plug it in for this year's. Okay, so I take that, and now I'm plugging that in for this year's. Okay, keep in mind this is still over 4,000 for K. So now I'm going to have 3,150 plus 0.2 times 3,150 times 1 minus that 3,150 over 4,000. Okay, so at that point I plug it in my calculator, which I'm going to do now. Got 3,150 plus 0.2 times 3,150 times 1 minus, now keep in mind you have to include those parentheses on your calculator. Okay, so what you're also going to want to do is put this in parentheses here, right? That 3,150 over 4,000. So times 1 minus that 3150 over 4,000. We plug that in and we're going to get 3,283.875. Okay, which when we round that, because we're asked to round to the nearest plant, and if we're not, we're going to have to anyways, because you can't have half a plant. We see we are asked to round to the nearest whole number, so that's what we're going to do. That's going to be 3284. Okay, so that'll be our answer there, 3284. Okay, so the big thing there was remembering that you had to do that twice because it was 2 years from now. And then the other big thing was just plugging in that 4,000 for K, right? Other than that, you really just had to rely on your calculator there, okay? You do not want to do this one using mental math. That's going to take way too long. Calculator's your friend with a situation like this for sure. So 3284 is answer for 37. Let's take a look at what 38 is asking. The botanist would like to increase the number of plants the environment can support so that the population of the species will increase more rapidly. If the botanist's goal is that the number of plants will increase from 3,000 this year to 3,360 next year, how many plants must the modified environment support? Okay, well in this case we know, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to erase this, okay, so let's erase this. We know that she wants next year there to be 3,360, right? 3,360. I'll just quick check, make sure that's the right number. It is 3,360. Okay, so she wants 3,360 next year, so 3,360. We know this year she's got 3,000. Okay, we know this year she's got 3,000, this year 3,000. Okay, now we got to solve for K. So we're going to solve for K. We're going to start by subtracting 3,000 from each side. Okay, we subtract 3,000 from each side, get rid of that. We subtract 3,000 here. Okay, we know 3,360 minus 3,000 is just going to give us 360. So that's going to give us 360 then. So now we got 360 is equal to 0.2 times 3,000, and then times that 1 minus 3,000 over K. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to divide by that 0.2 times 3,000. Okay, so I'll divide by 0.2 times 3,000, get rid of all this. Okay, I got to do it over here as well. Divide by 0.2 times 3,000. I'll plug that into my calculator, see what I get. 360 divided by 0.2 times 3,000. And that's going to give me 0.6. Okay, so I'll get rid of that. That's going to give me 0.6. So now I've got 0.6 is equal to this 1 minus 3,000 over K. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to subtract 1 from each side, get rid of that. So I subtract 1 from each side, 0.6 minus 1, that's going to give me negative 0.4. Okay, so now I've got negative 0.4 is equal to negative 3,000 over K. So I'm going to write that over here, negative 0.4. Negative 0.4 is equal to negative 3,000 over K. All right, at this point I'm going to have to multiply each side by K, multiply each side by K. Okay, so now we've got K times negative 0.4. At that point I divide by negative 0.4 to solve for K. Divide by negative 0.4. Now I've got negative 3,000 over negative 0.4. I'm going to plug that in my calculator and solve for K. Okay, so K is going to equal that negative 3,000 over negative 0.4. Our negatives are going to cancel, and let's see what we're left with. 3,000 over 0.4, that's going to give us 7,500. So our answer there is going to be 7,500. So obviously that's a very, very large number, big increase from what we had in 37, dealing with that 4,000 for K. But we're going to need that extra increase in order to get to this 3,360 next year, right? If we want a large increase, we're going to have a larger value for K, so that certainly makes perfect sense. And that leads me into the discussion that I do want to include today, especially since we're so far ahead, is I want to talk about using common sense just to make sure your answer is correct, right? We saw in 37 that we ended with 3,150 after our first year of growth, with K being 4,000. So if we want to end with 3,360, that K is going to have to be a lot larger number in order for us to increase more exponentially or more rapidly. So it would make sense that we have 7,500 for our answer for K. Now if we end with something like 1,000, that would not make sense because that would be decreasing K, which would cause us to decrease our growth. So that would not make sense, right? So we want to just use common sense, right? If we see that our answer doesn't make sense in context of the problem, then we're going to want to double check everything we did, make sure we did it right, okay? So in this case, it makes perfect sense, obviously, so we're not going to want to check anything because we already did because it makes sense, right? So with that, let's go ahead and switch over to the other section. All right, for the reading section today, we're going to be going through passage 4 of SAT Practice Test 6. So this is a two-passage section, which means we're going to have a passage 1 and a passage 2, which means that we're going to approach this differently than we would a normal one. Okay, so as I go through this today, I'm really going to be breaking down the strategy for two-passage sections even more. I did this in a video prior, about 10 days ago or so. I'm going to be doing it again here, really trying to break down that strategy, get you guys used to it, make sure that I give my insights into how my strategy changes for this type of a reading section and all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my first read through with my highlighter as I normally do. Once again, we're still focused on teaching you accuracy for now. We'll worry more about pacing on the reading section later on. Probably in about 2 weeks is when we'll start working more on pacing for the reading section. Maybe not even 2 weeks, maybe in a week and a half or a week. Right around the midway point, maybe a little bit past then, is when we're going to really start working on pacing for the reading section. And at that point, you'll really start to get a good feel for it. But for now, we're really focused on teaching you accuracy. So that's what I'm going to do today. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through. I'm going to highlight the things that I would be underlining if I did my initial read through paper pencil like you would be doing on the SAT. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I guess one other thing I should quick clarify is how I approach the two passage sections because it's different. What I do is I read passage 1 first. So I read passage 1 first. I'm going to move over to my other side a minute. That way I can, let's see. All right, there we go. Let's see if it's working. Okay, I'm going to move over to my other side real quick and just show you how I approach this. All right, so what I do, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read passage 1. Okay, I do it just like my normal read through, just I highlight a little bit different things, right? So I'll tell you what to underline. It's going to be a little bit different with two passage sections. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Second thing I'm going to do, I'm going to answer the questions that are about passage 1. So answer questions on passage 1. So questions that are particular to passage 1 only. All right, then after that, what am I going to do? I'm going to read passage 2. After I read passage 2, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to answer the questions that ask me specifically about passage 2 only. So answer questions on passage 2 only. Okay, at that point I've read both passages. So then after I've answered those questions, at that point I answer the questions that are on both of them, that ask me to compare them, contrast them, all of that. Working between the two authors, any questions that ask on both, so on P2 and P1, so passage 2 and passage 1. So this is basically an outline of how I approach these two passage sections like this. This is how I'd recommend you do it. The first thing that you're going to do, and one thing I guess we could put as a 0 step here even, would be to read that intro, right? So read kind of that intro thing that discusses what the two paragraphs or the two passages are going to be about. So what I would do is I would actually go ahead and I'm going to recommend that you read this whole thing first, okay? Because sometimes that second passage will be a response to the first, in which case it does change a little bit what we're going to underline in that first passage. So I would definitely recommend that you read that full intro first, okay? I'm not sure if I said that in that other video that was about 10 days ago with the two passage sections, but I'm going to say it now, and this is the strategy I want you to use. So if I said something different before, I have changed my mind. This is the strategy I want you to use. I want you to read that intro first, and I want you to read the intro for both passage 1 and passage 2, right? Not the introduction paragraph, but this little part right here that gives me the title and what that response is to. This right here that I'm putting a star by right now. Okay, read that first, then follow that strategy I just put here. So then after that, we read passage 1, answer questions on passage 1, read passage 2, answer questions passage 2, and then answer the questions on both of them. All right, so now that I've said that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we've got passage 1 is adopted from Abraham Lincoln. It's titled His Address to the Young Men's Lyceum of Springfield, Illinois. It's originally delivered in 1838. Passage 2 is from Henry David Thoreau, Resistance to Civil Government, published in 1849. All right, let every American, every lover of liberty, every well-wisher of his posterity, swear by the blood of the Revolution never to violate in the least particular the laws of the country, and never to tolerate their violation by others. As the patriots of '76 did to the support of the Declaration of Independence, so to the support of the Constitution and laws, let every American pledge his life, his property, and his sacred honor. Let every man remember that to violate the law is to trample on the blood of the Father and to tear the character of his own and his children's liberty. Let reverence for the laws be breathed in every, or let reverence for the laws be breathed by every American mother to the lisping babe that prattles on her lap. Let it be taught in schools and seminaries and in colleges. Let it be written in primers, spelling books, and in almanacs. Let it be preached from the pulpit, proclaimed in legislative halls, and enforced in courts of justice. And in short, let it become the political religion of the nation. And let the old and the young, the rich and the poor, the grave and the gay, of all sexes and tongues, and colors and conditions, sacrifice unceasingly upon its altars. When I so pressingly urge a strict observance of the laws, let me not be understood as saying there are no bad laws, nor that grievances may not arise for the redress of which no legal provisions have been made. I mean to say no such thing, but I do mean to say that although bad laws, if they exist, should be repealed as soon as possible, still while they continue in force for the sake of example, they should be religiously observed. So also in unprovided cases, if such arise, let proper legal provisions be made for them with the least possible delay, but till then let them, if not too intolerable, be borne with. There is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law. In any case that arises, as for instance, the promulgation of abolitionism, one of two positions is necessarily true. That is, the thing is right within itself, and therefore deserves the protection of all law and all good citizens, or it is wrong and therefore proper to be prohibited by legal enactments. And in neither case is the interposition of mob law either necessary, justifiable, or excusable. Okay, so at that point we've read passage 1. I'm going to quick cover why I highlighted the things I covered, then we'll get into the questions on passage 1. All right, so the things I highlighted, you would be underlining since you can't use a highlighter. As far as this, same thing up here. I do it every time. Every time I'm going to highlight the author, title of my article, okay, the year it was published or delivered, in this case 1838. I do the same thing. Henry David Thoreau is the other author, his title, the year his was written. Okay, so that's pretty much consistent across pretty much every passage type, all of that. Okay, now we got here. All right, so as far as two passage things, I always want to make sure that I'm highlighting claims, okay? So in this case, we're claiming never violate the laws of the country and never tolerate their violation by others. Okay, so this is a major claim from Lincoln in his passage. All right, so it's a major claim. I always want to make sure I highlight major claims, so that's why I highlighted that, major claim. Okay, next thing, we had let every man remember that to violate the laws, to trample on the blood of his father, tear the character of his own, and his children's liberty. Okay, why did I highlight this? Well, this is really showing the seriousness or the weight behind Lincoln's argument in his mind. Okay, so this is the seriousness of Lincoln's claim. Okay, it's showing how he's very, very serious about this. He's saying that if you are to disobey these laws, then you're trampling on the blood of your fathers, or the four grounding fathers that really made this country, right? The founding fathers, okay? As well as your children's liberty. So he's really, really serious about making sure that you're obeying those laws. So that really showed me the seriousness of it. Next thing I highlighted was him pressingly urging a strict observance of laws. So he's once again showing that seriousness. But then we have something that is really, really important that I highlighted, okay? And this is something that you're going to want to pay attention to because it's particular to two passage sections. Anytime someone says, let me not be understood in a two passage section, or something addressing what someone else may say, always highlight that. And if you ever have a two passage reading section like this where you're comparing two, always make sure you highlight anything that says, let me not be misunderstood, or anything referring to someone else and what they could interpret him saying. Anything that sounds like it could be something that could be compared between two texts is something you always want to highlight. In your case, you're going to be underlining, not highlighting, but really just pay attention to that, okay? So let me not be understood as saying there are no bad laws, nor that grievances may not arise for the redress of which no legal provisions have been made. So this is saying he's acknowledging their bad laws, okay? So this is him acknowledging a counter-argument. Anytime someone acknowledges a counter-argument or makes a counter-argument, always highlight that, okay? Because if there's a counter-argument that is being made or acknowledged, the other passages might take that counter-argument and run with it or something like that. So anytime we see that, we want to make sure we're highlighting that, in your case, underlining. All right, although bad laws, if they exist, should be repealed as soon as possible. Okay, that's a secondary claim. Okay, I always make sure I highlight claims. Continue in force for the sake of example, they should be observed. Okay, once again, that's a claim. Okay, even if the law is bad, he's saying that they should be observed. All right, up here we've got nothing highlighted there, so we're all good to answer questions on passage 1 now. Okay, so in passage 1, Lincoln contends that breaking the law has which consequence? Well, Lincoln's really talking about how breaking the law is undermining and repudiating the nation's values, right? He says that it's pretty much trampling on the founding fathers' ideals. It's stepping on your children's liberties. It's really showing that he thinks that it's really repudiating and undermining those nation's values, right? The nation's values from those founding fathers. As far as A, why A, C, and D are wrong, A says it slows the repeal of bad laws. He never makes that argument. C, it leads slowly but inexorably to rule by the mob. This one right here would be focusing too narrow on where he talks about rule by mob. We would be focusing too much on that. That's too narrow. We're not looking big picture here. The other thing that he says, also he wouldn't necessarily say that, I don't know if he'd really characterize it as a consequence of breaking the law, it leading to rule by the mob. He would probably say that that's kind of linked, but I don't know if we'd say the word consequence. But even if we were to say the word consequence there, he doesn't necessarily say it leads slowly to it either. He kind of says that it could lead fairly quickly to it. But also, either way, no matter what, that's too narrow of an answer choice, okay? We want to focus on where he talks about breaking the law and it undermining the nation's values. As far as it creating division between social groups, he doesn't really touch on that. As far as evidence there, that's going to be where we talk about this right here. I believe that that's going to be A for 34, and it is going to be A. Let every man through liberty. That's when we really talk about the founding fathers and trampling on your children's liberty, right? I highlighted that, showing us the seriousness of his claim. And this really shows us that trampling on the blood of his father, tearing the character of his own and his children's liberty, really showing how serious he is about how violating the law is really pretty much being a disgrace to the nation's founding ideals, is how he sees it. Okay, so that's really undermining, repudiating the nation's values. So A would be our evidence there. So 34, that's an evidence question, obviously. I forgot to do question types on these. I'll go through and do those. 33, in passage 1, Lincoln contending breaking the law has which consequence? This one's basically, I'd say this one's tough. It's a little bit of a little detail question. You could also kind of answer it if you kind of knew the big picture, but really it was looking at that little detail in the beginning when he talks about it being trampling on your children's liberty and talking about the founding fathers. I'd say that that's really a little detail question, asking you to remember that part. So that one's kind of reading comprehension, remembering that detail there. All right, 35. As used in line 24, urge most nearly means what? Okay, this is obviously a words in context question because it's most nearly means. We go through, find line 24, we find urge, and then come up with our own answer choice from there. So let's go ahead and do that. We go to line 24. We see we have when I so pressingly urge. I'm going to put this in blue so you can see it better. When you so pressingly urge a strict observance of all the laws, let me not be misunderstood as saying there are no bad laws. Okay, he's really, when he say that he pressingly observes, or I'm sorry, when he pressingly urges a strict obedience of the laws, he's really, excuse me, my throat is very, very dry right now. All right, when he's saying that he's urging a strict observance of the laws, he's really saying that he's advocating for a strict observance of the laws or arguing for it. But really, I would say advocating would be my best choice. Arguing would be my secondary choice. Let's see if we have any of those. We see we do have advocating right here. So D would be our answer choice for 35. We wouldn't say that he's hastening people to obey laws or stimulating them to obey laws or requiring them to obey laws, but he is advocating for it. So D would be our answer for 35. All right, now we got 36. So the sentence in lines 24 to 28 primarily serve which function in passage 1? We got to go take a look at those, figure out what they are first, and then come up with our own answer choice. So this is a purpose question, obviously, because it asks us for the purpose of this. We see 24 starts here, so when I so pressingly urge a strict observance of all laws, let me not be understood as saying there are no bad laws, nor that grievances may not arise for the redress of which no legal provisions have been made. Okay, well, what's the purpose of this? I already kind of said it when I went through my notes here. That's that it acknowledges a counter-argument, right? I talked about that when I talked about why I highlighted that, because it's acknowledging a counter-argument, and he doesn't want to be misunderstood. So that's really what that's talking about. So let's find an answer choice that has that. Let's go through A through D, figure out which one's right. We have A, it refuses and refutes a potential counter-argument to Lincoln's argument. That is not correct, and here's why, okay? What it's really doing there, well, it is, I wrote down, obviously, that it is, I wrote down that it's kind of acknowledging a counter-argument, but it's less that it's acknowledging a counter-argument and more so that he's trying not to be misunderstood, right? This is the key phrase right here, and I'm going to put it in blue as well so you can see it better. The key phrase here is let me not be misunderstood, or let me not be understood as saying there are no bad laws, okay? So that's him acknowledging that there are bad laws, right? He's trying to make sure that he's understood correctly. So that's really what he's doing there, is trying to make sure he's understood correctly. He's trying to avoid a counter argument being based on some misinterpretation of what he's saying. Okay, so A is going to be incorrect because it's not refuting a potential counter argument to his argument. More so, what it's doing is it's anticipating and correcting a possible misinterpretation of his argument. Okay, he's worried people will misinterpret him saying that laws should be obeyed as all laws being correct, and he's not saying that. So really, what he's doing there, he's anticipating and correcting that possible misinterpretation. So for 36, D will be our correct answer there. As far as B, it identifies and concedes a crucial shortcoming. He's not acknowledging a shortcoming in his argument. He's just making sure that he's understood correctly. C, it acknowledges and substantiates a central assumption of his argument. No. All right, so 36 there is going to be D. Now we can go and move on to question 37. So as used in line 32, observed most nearly means what? Okay, so we can go to line 32. We can find observed and find what that most nearly means. All right, so we have so. Where is it? Where is it? Right here. Okay, so I'm going to put it in blue so you can see it again better. We see it's right here. All right, so we have to read the whole sentence to get some context here. We've got, I mean to say no such thing, but I do mean to say that although bad laws, if they exist, should be repealed as soon as possible, still while they continue in force for the sake of example, they should be religiously observed or followed. Okay, he's arguing for the following of laws, the observing of laws. He really means followed. Okay, he wants those laws followed. So that would be our best answer there. Let's see if we have that. That is question 37. We see we do have that. So 37 there, our answer is going to be A. All right, so as far as why B through D are wrong, I'll go ahead and touch on that real quick. This is obviously a words in context question. I'll go back and answer the question types for the other ones. I forgot to do that. As far as why scrutinized is wrong, he's not saying the laws should be scrutinized. He's saying that they should be observed or followed. He's not saying they should be contemplated. He's saying they should be followed, not noticed. He's saying they should be followed or observed. All right, he's saying that we need to set an example, which also indicated to us that he wants them followed, setting that example of following the laws. Okay, I'm going to quick touch on the other question types. 37 is obviously words in context. I got a 35, that's words in context. I think I said that already. 36, that's a purpose question, right? What is this sentence in lines 24 to 28? What is it serving to do? What is the purpose of including it? So that's a purpose question, is 36. Okay, back down, we got 38. 38 talks about passage 2, so I'm going to go ahead and read passage 2 at that point, as I would recommend you do. Okay, so we have unjust laws exist. Shall we be content to obey them, or shall we endeavor to amend them? And obey them until we have succeeded. Hang on, I'm going to switch to my highlighter real quick so I can highlight things. Okay, there we go. Or shall we transgress them at once? Men generally under such a government as this think that they ought to wait until they have persuaded the majority to alter them. They think that if they should resist, the remedy would be worse than the evil, but it is the fault of the government itself that the remedy is worse than the evil. It makes it worse. Why is it more apt to anticipate and provide for reform? Why does it not cherish its wise minority? Why does it cry and resist before it hurts? If the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go, let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out. If the injustice has a spring, or pulley, or a rope, or a crank, exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether the remedy will not be worse than the evil. But if it is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agents of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Let your life be a counter friction to stop the machine. What I have to do is to see at any rate that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn. As for adopting the ways which the state has provided for remedying the evil, I know not such of ways. They take too much time and a man's life will be gone. I have other affairs to attend to. I came into this world not chiefly seeking to make this a good place to live in, but to live in it, be it good or bad. A man has not everything to do, but something, and because he cannot do everything, it is not necessary that he should do something wrong. I do not hesitate to say that those who call themselves abolitionists should at once effectually withdraw their support, both in person and in property, from the government, and not wait till they constitute a majority of one, before they suffer the right to prevail through them. I think that it is enough if they have God on their side without waiting for that of another one. Moreover, any man more right than his neighbors constitutes a majority of one already. All right, so I'm going to quick go through what I highlighted, then we'll get into the questions as far as passage 2 goes. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my pen real quick. Okay, obviously I already talked about highlighting the things in that intro part. Now let's get into this. So we have, if the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go. Okay, this is basically saying if the injustice isn't too severe, just let it go because it's part of government and it'll get worked out in the end. Okay, so that's basically making a claim. Okay, once again, anytime I make a claim, I want to highlight that. So that's why I highlighted that. Next thing I've got is down here. We've got, but if it is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Okay, so this is something that is going against what Lincoln says. So anything that I have that goes against what another passage says, or is a rebuttal, or is a counterclaim, in this case it's a counterclaim, it's a claim that is counter to what Lincoln is arguing. Anytime I have that, I want to make sure I highlight it, right? Lincoln said obey laws pretty much at all costs. Thoreau is saying no, if it requires you to be the agent of injustice, or in other words, requires you to do wrong, then go ahead and break it. Next we have, I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn, right? He's saying, I'm going to break the law because I don't want to lend myself to that sin, right? He doesn't want to sin. He wants to be on a moral side, or the right side of history, right? So this is really him kind of showing more of his claim, really kind of building on his claim. This one right here, if you didn't want to highlight it or underline it, it wouldn't be a big deal. It doesn't seem too important, but I didn't know what was to come, so at that point in time, I thought it was possible it could be important. Next, we have, they take too much time and a man's life will be gone. They here is referring to the laws and the process of changing the laws. So this right here is a pretty big claim, I'd say, in my opinion. And also, it runs counter to Lincoln, right? Lincoln said, you can go ahead and use the laws, right? They have a process for repeals, go ahead and use that. So this is a counterclaim to what Lincoln was saying. He's saying, we don't have time for laws. Some laws are so unjust, we can't wait to fix them. Okay, so this is counterclaim to Lincoln. Anytime I have a counterclaim like that, I always want to make sure I highlight it. All right, and then as far as the last thing I highlighted, those who call themselves abolitionists. Why did I highlight this? Well, Lincoln briefly touched on slavery in his argument. So anytime I have shared evidence like this and it's used differently, like it is here, I always want to make sure that if it's used differently, or even if it's used the same, anytime I have the same evidence, I always want to highlight that in both of them, because what that's going to do is there's probably going to be a question, not for sure, but there could be a question that asks me to compare their use of evidence, right? Since it's the same evidence, but they use it in a different way. So that's always something I want to pay attention to. So as soon as I saw abolitionists here, I knew I had to highlight it because we briefly touched on slavery in the other argument. All right, so at once effectually withdraw their support. Okay, so he's once again a counterclaim to Lincoln. Okay, Lincoln was saying obey all laws. He's saying abolitionists, go ahead, withdraw your support because it's what you believe and you don't have time to wait for those laws. Okay, so both in person and in property from the government. All right, at that point, we can go and get into passage 2. Those questions we got right here. In passage 2, Thoreau indicates that some unjust aspects of government are what? Okay, this is pretty much a big picture question. Okay, you could argue that it takes little details, but really as long as you know the big picture of the passage, you'll be good answering this. As far as unjust aspects of the government, really what he's talking about as far as unjust, he indicates that some unjust aspects of government are, okay, I'm sorry, I missed the word some there. This is really going to be pretty much a little detail question. I missed the word some when I read through that question. Now that I reread it, I see I have some here. This will be a little detail question. Okay, in passage 2, Thoreau indicating that some unjust aspects of government are what? Okay, that's going to be inevitable and should be endured, right? He talks about how, and I highlighted this as well, so we can go find that. Is our next question evidence? It is. So I'll go ahead and find the evidence for it. That's what I highlighted up here when we talk about if injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go. Let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out. So that's really, I'm probably looking at 58 to 60 or 58 to 61 there, something that contains really this part I'm putting in parentheses here. Okay, that's really claiming that if that injustice is just something that's going to be part of government, because there's always going to be some laws that aren't good or could be improved, then just let it go. Okay, so that's really what he's arguing there. That's going to support that argument that some unjust laws should just be let go for a while and then just wait to fix them. So as far as lines, I totally forgot. Okay, it was 58 to 59. I forgot the lines at first, but I remember now. It was 58 to 59. So that's going to be, for question 39, C would be our answer there. Obviously, this is an evidence question. Okay, I'll go ahead and put that there. As far as question type for 38, I already touched on that little detail question. As far as question 40, that's going to be way down here. The primary purpose of each passage. All right, this is most definitely a big picture question. Anytime that we're asked for the primary purpose of each passage, I call it a purpose big picture question, right? Ask for the purpose or the big picture of each passage. What's it really trying to do? Anytime that a passage has a purpose, that's really going to be the big picture of it anyways. So I just call it a purpose big picture question, combine the two. All right, so as far as the purpose of each passage, well, what is each passage doing? We got passage 1. Passage 1 is really arguing for the obeying of all laws. And passage 2 is really arguing for the breaking of some laws. So what they're both doing is they're both advancing a view regarding whether individuals should follow all of the country's laws. Okay, so C would be our correct answer for 40. As far as why A through D are wrong, let's go through that in a minute. A, make an argument about the difference between legal duties and moral imperatives. We're not really touching on moral imperatives. Okay, or I mean we are in a sense, but the thing is that that's too specific to passage 2. Okay, that's too specific to passage 2. Passage 1, we don't touch on moral imperatives. Passage 1, we're really just talking about legal duties. Lincoln is really pretty much just stressing that we are legally required to follow the law. That's really his main argument. He's not touching on a moral imperative to stop, to break laws if it's immoral. He never really touches on that. So this is too specific to passage 2. And anytime you're asked to compare purposes of two passages like this, you want to watch out for answers that are too specific to one passage. Because a lot of times that's what these answers will be. There'll be one that's too specific to passage 2 and one that's too specific to passage 1. And you're asked for the primary purpose of each passage, okay? So you've got to pay attention to that. B, discussing how laws ought to be enacted and changed in democracy. Okay, once again, this one is, I would say this one's too close to passage 1. Okay, Lincoln is talking about, and this one's also kind of irrelevant, honestly, because passage 1 doesn't even talk about it too much. But if we're picking between passage 1 and passage 2 as to which one's closer to it, it would be passage 1. But it's also kind of unrelated a little bit. But as far as discussing how laws should be enacted and changed in a democracy, that's really Lincoln's argument there. He's saying let's take time and let's change them, okay? So that one's too close to Lincoln, not close enough to Thoreau. Also, it's just kind of unrelated as a whole, okay? It's not really close to the primary purpose, okay? We got to pay attention to that word, primary. As far as D, articulating standards by which laws can be evaluated as just or unjust, Lincoln never describes the standards there. Thoreau doesn't really either, so D would be incorrect. 41. Based on the passages, Lincoln would most likely describe the behavior Thoreau recommends in lines 64 to 66 as what? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at 64 to 66 in passage 2 and come up with what that says and what we think Lincoln would think of it. I think I just went too far. No, right here. Now I forgot which lines it was, to be honest. Let me quick scroll down and check again. Okay, 64 to 66. All right, so we've got, I see that I highlighted that, so that's always good. Make sure that, like I said, counterclaims, you're often asked questions on that. So we have, but if it is of such a nature, it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Okay, Lincoln's going to respond to that by saying, no, don't break the law, because that's Lincoln's argument here. Lincoln's saying take the proper path to changing the law, but don't break it, okay? Don't break it until it doesn't need to be broken. Don't break it, just change it, okay? So Lincoln is very, very adamant about this, and he would actually argue that that's a rejection of the country's proper forms of remedy, right? He's saying that's rejecting that proper form of remedy, being changing the law through the judicial system, or through the legislative system, rather. Okay, so he's really saying that you're rejecting the country's proper form. He's saying you're basically stomping on the founding fathers' graves. He's really arguing that you need to take the proper process to change it legislatively or judicially. So 41 answer there is going to be B. As far as why A, C, and D are wrong, let's go ahead and cover that real quick. So A, an excusable reaction to an intolerable situation. He wouldn't say it's excusable. He says never break the law, so A would be wrong. C, an honorable response. Once again, he would say it's not honorable. D, a misapplication of a core principle of the Constitution. He would say that you're not applying a core principle of the Constitution because he considers obeying laws a core principle, so he wouldn't say you're misapplying it. He would say you're just not applying it at all. So D would be wrong as well. 42. As far as question type, did I get one on that? I'll go ahead and put it in now. 41, question type. Based on passages, Lincoln most likely described the behavior. Okay, this is an inference question. Right? How do I know if it's an inference question? Because it's asking me to infer what Lincoln would respond to Thoreau's statement as. Okay, so I'm really inferring based on the text. So that is an inference question. 42, based on the passages, one commonality in the states. Based on the passages, one commonality in this man, I can't talk today. Based on the passages, one commonality in the stances Lincoln and Thoreau take toward abolitionism is what? All right, neither one of them really embraces an argument on this, okay? We see that Lincoln touches on it, but he touches on it basically as an example in the discussion of his passage. Now, Thoreau touches on it as well, but he never takes a personal stance on it. He just says, abolitionists, you'd be basically good in my book if you wanted to go ahead and start disobeying laws, because I think that laws that people believe unjust should be broken. Okay, he's not really saying whether abolitionists, whether he agrees with them or not. Neither one does. So neither one is really embracing that cause as their own. So D would be our best answer for 42. I'll go ahead and cover why A through C are wrong real quick as well. A, both authors see the cause as warranting drastic action. Lincoln definitely does not, because he's saying obey all laws. B, both authors view the cause as central to their argument. They're not really using it as central to the argument, okay? They're really just, Lincoln really only touches on it briefly, and same with Thoreau. Thoreau really only touches on it briefly as well, so it's definitely not central to their argument, so B is wrong. C, neither author expects the cause to win widespread acceptance. We never hear about that. We never touch on whether they think it'll be widespread acceptance there. So C would be wrong as well. So that takes us through this passage. I'll quick touch on question type for 42. I haven't done that yet. This one really, based on the two passages, one commonality is that they take toward abolitionism. This one's a little detail question between both of them. Abolitionism is pretty much a small detail in each passage. So it's really connecting those two those two little details in each passage. So that's the question type there. So as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to have a good day. Like, share, subscribe. There'll be a donation link in the description, so if the video is helpful, when the donation link is up and running, it will be there. Any private SAT tutoring I'm doing will be linked in the description. Any private college admissions consulting I'm doing will be linked in the description as well. Thank you and have a good day.